Chapter 376, War Dennis of Luck. The Syndicate of the Nameless Lords was a secret organization of the world's elites that directed and controlled global events, covertly shaping history and aiming for a future where they would be the only ones left standing to rule. As such, obviously, they were against the monarchs. It was nothing new. In this era of Awakened, where individuals possessed mythical superpowers once only seen in fiction, everyone born with a strong potential wanted to be the king or queen of the world. Over the years, numerous villains had attempted to realize this dream of theirs, the dream of world domination. They had created cults and groups, gangs and armies, but the monarchs always prevailed. With each victory, they not only cemented their positions as the apex of all Awakened, but they also showcased why they were called the gods of modern day. It was impossible to overthrow them. But the Syndicate didn't care. They were familiar with the grand reputation of the 5 people whom they had dared to oppose, and they still did it. Where did they get so much courage from? Why, despite witnessing every other New World Order organization fall before the monarchs, did they still try to follow that same path? That was because the Syndicate wasn't a typical organization with a rigid hierarchy like most of those other secret societies. There was no supreme leader sitting at the top of the pyramid. There was no Grand Council constantly meeting in dimly lit halls. There was no chain of command that could be traced, infiltrated, or broken. Instead, it functioned more like an invisible marketplace. Its members were scattered across the world as politicians, billionaires, media tycoons, research magnates, military generals, and the occasional high-ranking Awakened who preferred power from the shadows rather than the spotlight. These people did not serve one another. They invested in one another. They operated in cells, each working on separate aspects of their grand plan, ensuring that no single failure could cripple the whole group. Or, at least, that's what they thought. The reason the Syndicate had survived so long in secrecy, the reason that despite shaping so many of the major world events it still never clearly fell on the radar of the monarchs, was because even most of its own members didn't know much about their own organization. The truth was that there was indeed a supreme leader sitting at the top of the pyramid. There was indeed a Grand Council constantly meeting in dimly lit hallways, and sometimes most of the time in trendy cafes. There was indeed a chain of command, but because only a select few knew of its existence, it could really not be traced, infiltrated, or broken. And at the very top of that chain of command, there sat an assembly of core members who were all the true masterminds steering the Syndicate toward its ultimate goal. Each of these individuals was a true believer in the Syndicate's misanthropic ideology: humans are irredeemable, and only the Spirit King's return can cleanse the world. However, their motivations and methods varied, with some pursuing personal evolution, others seeking vengeance against humanity, and some merely embracing absolute nihilism. Ileana Marcies was none of them. She had joined the Syndicate by mistake while attending Dawn Academy, found it fun enough to stay, and kept rising in the ranks by a series of sheer coincidences. She was just lucky, always at the right place at the right time. For instance, today she was on a date with a famous movie star. She leaned back comfortably in the plush velvet chair of the rooftop restaurant, swirling a glass of vintage red wine that likely cost more than a mid-sized sedan. Across from her was Julian Vars, arguably the hottest sensation that had hit the entertainment industry like a storm last year. He was currently deep into a monologue about the emotionally taxing nature of his latest method acting role, but Ileana wasn't really listening. She was busy being lucky. "Is everything all right, darling?" Julian asked, his voice dropping into that husky register he used for romantic leads. "You seem distracted." "Oh, just thinking about how small the world is," Ileana lied smoothly. She caught the eye of a passing waitress, a young woman who looked exhausted and was clearly at the end of a double shift. As the waitress leaned in to refill their water, Ileana's expression soured with arrogance. "Careful, you nearly dripped on my sleeve. Honestly, they'll hire any bitch off the street these days, won't they?" She scoffed. The waitress stiffened, her face flushed red in humiliation. "Ma'am, you cannot talk to me like this. It wasn't even close to your..." "Oh, just shut up and get to work." The waitress looked ready to lose her mind, when suddenly, her coworker jumped in and pushed her away before mumbling an apology on her friend's behalf. Though the waitress scurried away, her eyes stung with frustration. And that was the first domino to fall. Such a simple event that, on any other day, would have amounted to nothing. But today it did. Hours later, after the date had ended with a polite peck on the cheek and a promise to call that Ileana had no intention of keeping, the waitress, whose name was Elise, stood outside the staff entrance. It was late, the weather was cold and depressing, her double shift had finally ended, and she was venting her fury into her phone. I'm telling you, Mark, she was awful. Just because she's rich doesn't mean she can talk to people like that, Elise grunted. On the other end of the line, her boyfriend, Mark, was driving his old SUV through the city outskirts to pick her up. The car's jet thrusters kept its metallic body inches above the ground, speeding through the night wind. He was tired, stressed about rent, and the sound of Elise crying made his heart ache with a protective rage. I know, honey, I know. I'm almost there, Mark said, keeping his grip stern on the steering wheel. Tell you what, I'll pick you up, make you a good dinner, we'll watch one of those boring movies you like, and stay in all day tomorrow, okay? My movie choices are not boring. Elise gasped, suppressing a chuckle. Mark laughed. Then he looked down for a split second to tap the end call button, his mind preoccupied with how much he loved his girlfriend. Despite nothing going right for him in his life, despite the fact that his parents loved his brother more because he had a lucrative job, despite him having to worry about money every single month, there was one thing he did right. It was her. She had been by his side through thick and thin, even though he was not half the man she deserved. He really was so lucky. But unbeknownst to him, luck was not on his side tonight. Because in that exact same moment, 3 blocks away, Ileana Marcies was clumsily navigating the sidewalk after one too many drinks she shouldn't have had. She took a quick turn and bumped squarely into a man in a business suit. Oh, I am so sorry, she chirped, her hand briefly grazing his arm. In the process, she neatly swiped his phone from his hand, letting it clatter onto the pavement. The man hissed in annoyance, muttered a curse under his breath at the drunken lady, and spun around sharply to retrieve it. His sudden, aggressive movement startled a young mother walking nearby with her 6-year-old son. The mother flinched, and her grip went loose on her son's hand, but more importantly, on the string of the bright red balloon the boy was holding. A gust of wind swept through the street, catching the red balloon and yanking it out of the boy's startled fingers. My balloon, the child cried. Without thinking, he darted away from his mother's side to chase the red balloon as it floated toward the center of the road. Mark, still in the middle of pulling his eyes back from his phone, looked up just in time to see a flash of a yellow jacket and a red balloon in his headlights. His heart leapt into his throat. He didn't have time to think. He just slammed on the brakes and swiveled the steering wheel with everything he had. The SUV shrieked as it veered off course. Luckily, he missed the boy by inches. Unluckily, the momentum carried the car across the intersection, right into the path of a heavy military supply truck that was barreling through a green light at the crossroads. Thwam! The collision that followed was deafening. Mark's SUV was crumpled like a soda can. He died before he could even register the impact. The military truck, forced to swerve by the wreck, slammed into a concrete divider. Its entire front end was thrashed. Its driver slumped over the wheel, deeply concussed. Within minutes, the scene turned into a chaotic mess of flashing lights and sirens. Because the military truck was carrying sensitive equipment, a second transport was called in to transfer the cargo. Amidst the smoke and the shouting of the first responders, a group of soldiers arrived to oversee the transfer. One of those soldiers, a man with a blank expression and a very specific set of orders, moved in quietly. While the others were distracted by the wreckage, he slid a small, nondescript metal box into a hidden compartment in the new truck. To the outside world, it was just a logistical hiccup. But to the syndicate, it was a heist performed in broad daylight without a single shot fired. This was how Ileana Marcies worked. This was how she had climbed the ranks of one of history's most dangerous covert organizations, by exploiting the series of coincidences that she would engineer herself. By being at the right place at the right time. Amongst the 6 ruling figureheads of the syndicate, she was 5th. She was Lachesis, the mistress of probabilities. Chapter 377, Masks and Dominoes. That same night, in a sprawling, high-security office overlooking the capital, Mayor Vane of Alessatra City sat trembling in rage behind his mahogany desk. He had just received the report. The salt is gone, Vane whispered, his face pale as ash. But how? We had 3 different decoys. The route was randomized by an AI. Who could have possibly known which truck it was in? It seems we did, sir, a soft, feminine voice replied from the doorway. The mayor looked up abruptly. Standing there was his longtime secretary, a woman he had trusted for nearly a decade. Her name was Maria Hart. She was an A-ranked awakened, a total beauty with long black hair, matching eyes, and a cheerful attitude to match. But beautiful women were a dime a dozen here in the northern safe zone. So that wasn't why Vane had hired her, no matter what some uncouth rumors said about him. He had given her this position because Maria was an extremely smart and hardworking assistant, always making an effort and volunteering for work that wasn't her responsibility, always the first one to keep her calm under pressure and taking notes. God knows how many times she had made his life easy. Right now, however, she wasn't holding a notepad. Right now she didn't even look like her usual self. There was a grimly serious look on her face as she slowly closed the door behind her with a quiet click. In the neon lights of the city spilling into the office from outside through tall roof-to-ceiling windows, her dark eyes caught a strange glint. Vane couldn't quite explain it right then, but he was suddenly getting very dangerous vibes from the woman. "What?" he asked uneasily, shifting in his chair. "What does that mean, Maria?" His secretary didn't answer. She just sauntered deeper into the room. All of a sudden, a cold shiver crawled down his spine. His pupils blew wide as he realized far too late that the "we" she referred to wasn't his staff. She was talking about them. Vane immediately lunged for the emergency alarm button hidden beneath the lip of his desk, but the woman moved with a speed that should have been physically impossible for a human. Before his finger could even brush the button, she was already behind him. She coiled around his neck like a serpent and lifted him from his chair, her arms locking the man twice her weight into an inescapable sleeper hold. The mayor struggled the best he could. He thrashed around and clawed at her arms, but nothing helped. He may as well have been trying to scratch steel. Soon, as the world began to gray at the edges of his vision, she leaned a bit closer and started whispering a haunting rhyme into his ear. 1 for the shadow, 2 for the door, 3 for the footsteps across the floor, 4 for the secret you thought you could keep. It was only then that Vane realized the true identity of the woman who had been acting as his secretary all these years. But it didn't matter now. Now he could only beg for his life. And beg he did. Lord Hollowvale, I'm sorry. Vane managed to choke out. His face was turning blue, his lungs burning and his teary vision rapidly failing. Please, I'm sorry. Give me one more chance. Please, Erg. The woman only tightened the noose and continued the rhyme in her emotionless tone. 5 for the eyes that watch you sleep. 6 for your silence, 7 for his grin. 8 for the moment I let myself in. The mayor slumped forward as his oxygen was fully cut off, slipping into unconsciousness. The woman held him there for a moment longer, ensuring he wouldn't wake anytime soon, before finally releasing him and smoothing the wrinkles from her skirt. Slowly, right then and there, her features began to ripple and melt like wax near a flame. Her height shifted and her shoulders broadened, her belly bloated outward and the structure of her face was reconstructed in real time until she became the splitting image of Mayor Vane. The new Mayor Vane calmly sat down in the chair, adjusted his tie using the desk mirror, and smiled almost like he was practicing how to smile with that face for the first time. Then he glanced down at the unconscious body of the real mayor crumpled on the floor. The man was now nothing more than a corpse waiting to happen, someone who had simply outlived his usefulness to the unseen hand. With a voice that shifted from Maria's soft lilt into Vane's gravelly baritone, the shapeshifter finished the final verse of the rhyme. 9 for the life you've thrown away. 10 for the debt you'll be forced to pay. Thank you for this face you've lent me. May you rest in peace in the hell we'll send thee. The impostor reached out, its, fingers tracing the polished edge of the mahogany desk. The transformation was absolute. Even the pheromones and the faint tremor in the hands, even the embarrassing memories and the deepest buried thoughts that he had all been perfectly copied. To the world outside that door, the mayor of Alessatra was still very much alive, albeit perhaps a little more unpredictable in the decisions he would soon make. The figure rose from the chair and dragged the real Vane toward a hidden compartment behind the bookshelf, a small space the mayor himself had constructed for his own illicit dealings. Now it was going to serve as his tomb. You shouldn't have betrayed us, Vane, the impostor muttered, checking the man's pulse one last time to make sure he was barely clinging to life. And for what? Loyalty, greed, whatever the reason was, you shouldn't have tried to trick us. Can you please stop talking to the soon-to-be dead? It's honestly so creepy. The new mayor turned around at the sound of the annoying yet very familiar voice. There, on the other side of the desk, now stood a tall woman in a black bodycon dress, her face all dolled up, auburn hair styled into a neat braided bun, and one hand casually clutching a designer purse. Alina, how was the date? The mayor asked. He should have been surprised that someone had managed to slip past the guards and enter this highly secured office so easily. But he wasn't. Ileana was, beyond comprehension. She had the power to trigger a butterfly effect, or several, at will. She could drop a penny into a fountain and cause a world leader to miss the meeting that would have prevented a war. So, at this point, he had stopped questioning what she could do and began wondering if there was anything she couldn't. Ileana rolled her eyes and tossed herself onto a nearby sofa, swinging her legs up onto the center table. The date was a disaster, obviously. Thankfully the guy was hot. She groaned like she was physically exhausted. But how many times do I have to remind you not to call me by my real name? We have aliases for a reason. The imposter, still wearing Mayor Vane's face, chuckled in a sound that carried a depth the real Vane had never possessed. But they're all so edgy. Take mine, for example. Lord Hollowvale, who even calls himself Lord. So you can go ahead and use my real name in return too. Quote. I don't know your real name. It's Aemond, Ileana scoffed. Yeah, right, Lord Hollowvale, the second in command of the Syndicate. He was a master of subterfuge and deception, possessing the gift of perfect identity shifting. Real name unknown. No one knew how old he truly was either. He had likely orchestrated countless betrayals and revolutions and political collapses throughout history. There was even a legend claiming he had once killed an angel. Again, no one had any way of confirming it. But Ileana didn't doubt it. She had only seen him fight once, and she could say with absolute certainty that there was no one stronger than him within the entire organization. Not even Selene Valkern, not even Varian the Unbound, not even Ileana herself. She didn't believe anyone among them could challenge him fairly. Except the nameless king himself, of course. Or perhaps the Hollow Harbinger. But he was sealed, currently busy rotting beneath the Golden Sanctuary. Ileana had never met him personally, but he was something of a legend himself. And the entire syndicate had been tasked with unsealing him before the nameless king returned to initiate the next phase of his grand plan. Now, unsealing the Hollow Harbinger wouldn't have been much of a problem. If the Golden Sanctuary hadn't been ruled by those monsters. The Theosbane clan, and especially him, the Dawn's Scourge. Arthur Kaiser Theosbane. Ileana leaned back deeper into the sofa. Did you get it? The needle. Hollowvale came around to sit across from her, crossing one leg over the other. Yes, one of my puppets retrieved it recently, he replied. I also found an interesting child. The one who has the summoning card of Asmodeus. Ileana's eyes all but bulged out of their sockets. He survived, in Noctvale Wilds. The man nodded, inspecting his pot belly. Yeah, him and a few other Apex cadets. What? She shot upright so fast the sofa creaked under her weight. For a quick moment, genuine disbelief flashed through her face. Noctvale Wilds is supposed to be a slaughterhouse prison. That jungle chews up seasoned awakened and spits out bones. And you're telling me a bunch of academy brats walked out alive? Maybe they were just lucky. I know what luck is, Ileana sputtered, and this is not it. They can't survive on luck alone. Hollowvale could only shrug lazily in reply, still wearing the late mayor's face like a perfectly fitted mask. According to Asmodeus, host, they had a seer with them. That girl you've been eyeing for quite some time now. The one from Luxara. Ileana rubbed her face slowly. Okay, that actually made a lot of sense. Also, Hollowvale went on, someone from her party killed the sleeping god there. And that made absolutely none. What? Ileana practically shrieked again. Who? Arthur's youngest child. At that point, she was starting to believe Hollowvale was simply spouting nonsense for the sake of it. How could a boy who hadn't even awakened his spiritual pressure manage to kill a fallen god? But Hollowvale wasn't finished yet. Now, he said with mild amusement, would you like to hear something even more interesting? Oh god, what now? Ileana asked warily. Remember Ishtara? It turns out more than half of these surviving kids were on a mission there. They were already suspected of interfering with our plans. At first, I also failed to see how a bunch of children could possibly have done that. But now, I'm very inclined to believe it. Ileana was so shocked by the revelation that she momentarily went numb. How could that even be possible? It can't be, she muttered. I thought someone of at least Selene's caliber had been involved. I personally calculated all the probabilities. I accounted for every possible variable. It took me months. And you're telling me, a kid undid all that work? Hollowvale stayed quiet. He knew the failure of Ishtara was already a sensitive topic for the Wardeness of Luck. She was young, still only in her early 20s and only recently graduated from Dawn Academy, the North's most prestigious institute for the awakened. She just didn't have the experience needed to deal with failures yet. Especially not one of this scale. So he let the silence linger. Ileana's knuckles dug into the armrest, her nails leaving faint crescent-shaped marks in the leather. No, she shook her head. No matter how much I think about it, no one could have figured out what was happening there. We had everything covered. To be fair, that was something that had been bothering all the syndicate's higher-ups. Their organization prided itself on being impossible to breach. But if that was true, then how had someone managed to dismantle their operation so thoroughly? It really wasn't possible unless someone knew the future. Ileana stopped mid-sentence, blinking as if startled by her own words. Exactly, Lord Hollowvale affirmed. That's exactly what I believe. Ileana swallowed, waiting for a few seconds before daring the question, who's your suspect? The Theosbane brat would be my guess, the mayor replied evenly. He has already accomplished one impossibility. Who's to say he wasn't responsible for the other? Yeah, it made sense. What didn't make sense, however, was how. How did he know the future? Was he a seer? But no, that wasn't possible. His origin card had something to do with matter manipulation, if Ileana remembered correctly. Even setting that aside, if he truly knew the future, then how much did he know? And more importantly, how much did he know about their plans? Wait a second. Hey, Ileana snapped her head up suddenly, glaring at the new mayor. How do you even know this? That they were the ones on the mission. Our informants couldn't verify any names. Lord Hollowvale smirked. When Ishtara fell under the authority of second years, I planted some of my puppets between them. So by the time they returned, you infiltrated the Apex Academy. Ileana nearly gasped. They had attempted to infiltrate Apex many times before. But the Grand Masters who conducted the cadets' interviews there somehow always managed to identify Hollowvale's puppets. Always. That was precisely why they had been forced to rely on living spies instead. But the problem with spies was that the Ascent Isles, and by extension Apex Academy, existed within the domain of the Central Monarch. And a monarch could almost always perceive what was happening inside their ruling territory. They were, in all senses of the word, omniscient within their own domain. No one could hide from them without using some very special artifacts. And those artifacts would immediately be detected by the Grand Masters. In short, transferring information in or out of Apex Academy had always been a challenge for the Syndicate. Especially after Rexard, the one guy who was in possession of the dimensional chambers where the Central Monarch could not peer through in the Academy, had mysteriously died. So the news that Hollowvale had finally infiltrated Apex Academy was monumental. It meant, we can at last move forward with the next major event that we've been preparing for nearly a year, Mayor Vane said, the smirk spreading across his face wider until it turned into a sinister smile as he rose from the chair. We'll kill the royal twins, and then we'll drop the Ascent Isles from the sky. Ileana returned a similar smile of her own. She could finally see it now. The possibility of Golden Sanctuary's fall. The possibility of Arthur Kaiser Theosbane's death. For the first time in forever. She could see that it was all finally within reach. All right then, I'll gather everyone, she said, standing up as well. And let the first domino fall.